All right, awesome. Good evening, good afternoon. Last session of the day, I know. Pretty hard, right? Do I need to do some sort of exercises to get the blood pumping or something? Let me know, that's okay. You do? Stand up. All right, you folks can stand up. I'll just think something off the top of my head. And you can, what do you want to do? Stretch a little bit, that's all. I mean, I can tell you stuff. I don't want to tell you to do burpees and push-ups and squats and whatnot. Even I can't not with all this stress. Just stretch a little bit, maybe shake hands with with folks, or maybe just do a high five or something. Like whatever you feel comfortable with, right? I just want your attention, that's all. All right, you can take a seat. We don't want to waste all our time here. All right, I know I'm the only one standing between you folks heading out for the weekend and grabbing your swags and everything, so please bear with me, and I really appreciate you folks sticking around for this last session of the day. Fun fact, when I was in Hyderabad last time, that was also in August, but that was in 2018, 5 years back. So my wife had some work here. She had an interview here at the University of Hyderabad. I was here in Gachibowli even that time. Wife is way smarter than me. She had a research lab in Delhi, and that's why she was here. She was interviewing there. That was a success, but it was a little stressful because we had our 2-year-old son here. He had fever already. We had no choice. We had to bring him along anyway. But this time, much better, much more relaxed. I'm enjoying the food and everything. So yeah, things are much better this time. All right, my name is Abhishek. In addition to watching and re-watching The Walking Dead, which is my favorite. Any Walking Dead fans? No one watches Walking Dead? Oh, awesome. You're my best friends. Awesome. Sorry? Walking Dead. Cheers, man. All right. Awesome. All right. Yeah, in addition to that, watching and rewatching all these things, I mainly work on Go, open source data like Kafka and Redis, and of course, containers and Kubernetes as well. But I have a bunch of other things to cover, much more interesting things, so I'll not waste too much time here. You can always connect with me. LinkedIn and Twitter is what I prefer. So I'll move on to the interesting part, not this. I went back. All right, so Kubernetes folks, who works on Kubernetes in any capacity, DevOps engineers, developers, whatever. Any capacity for that matter, yeah. All right, a fair amount of folks. So no matter what you do, right, what you tell your family, and by the way, I spent a lot of time on this slide, more than I should have. All this is like custom build, I didn't pick it up from anywhere. So no matter what you tell your friends, your family, or the recruiter, I mean, and by the way, this what I think I do and what recruiters think I do, that is, if you recognize, that's a snapshot of the CNCF landscape of projects. Who recognizes that? Cloud Native Computing Foundation, right? Yeah, that is what I tell recruiters I do, and I believe in that, right? So that's important. But I guess if you think about it, if you really reflect, what do we all really do? And don't take this personally, right? This is all lighthearted, just for fun. What I'm trying to get at is working on Kubernetes in any capacity should not make us feel like we are YAML engineers. We need not or should not turn into YAML engineer, unless of course this becomes the hot topic of the decade or something like that. Of course, then we start putting YAML engineers on a resume, then only then it is justified. Otherwise, the reality is that YAML is this lingua franca, so to speak, right? It is entrenched very deeply in the Kubernetes ecosystem. You must be using Helm, or, right, it's very common, or GitOps, or Customize, or perhaps you're using Kubernetes operators. YAML is going to be there on your face. It's there, like I said, deeply entrenched in the system. Can't avoid it. So that is why today I am not going to be talking about removing YAML. It's impossible. Like I said, too deep into our systems already. But it is about sidelining it. It is about perhaps pushing it behind the scenes a little bit, so that it is, life is a little bit more tolerable for us. That's my intention. And you can do this with many tools, right? And one of the tools I'm going to talk about today is cdk8s. It's a little tricky to pronounce. It's CDK for Kubernetes, or Cloud Development Kit for Kubernetes. So that's the tool I'm going to talk about today. And In this session, I'm going to switch back and forth a little bit, and I hope that's okay between slides and demo. If that gets too much for you, let me know. That's fine. We can do it the way you want it to. Like you can tell me, Abhishek, like dude, enough of demos or whatever, or you want to listen more. It's okay because I'm going to do some context switching, but it's up to you. You have a say there. Trust me. So just let me know, right? And yeah. I don't have all the time in the world. Last session, I want to actually keep it short if I can, but I think you will find this helpful. This is sort of a mini book, I think series of, a bunch of stuff. I think you will find this helpful. This has a GitHub repo, lots of code in there for you to try out after this session. I mean, just don't go reading this right away. But yeah, you can keep it for reference if you want to. I think I'm pretty confident that you'll find this useful. So something for you to know. Before I dive in deeper, I want to cover a couple of concepts. So Terraform and AWS CloudFormation, I'm assuming a lot of folks have already worked with it or at least heard of it, right? Terraform, CloudFormation. We have a Terraform champ there. I know this guy, yeah, raising his hand. So these tool sets are what fall into the category of infrastructure as code, IAC. We have tried them, tested them. I mean, they have worked very well for us over the years. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's this, what I tend to call, and even other folks as well, something called infrastructure is code. And there are things like AWS CDK, Cloud Development Kit, or Pulumi, and there are perhaps others as well, which I might have missed, or maybe I don't know them. But infrastructure is code is different. This is where configuration takes a backseat, and code, your programming language, right, whatever is supported by the tool, that comes to the forefront, right? So your JSON or YAML configs or your whatever custom templating language which Terraform uses, for example, that goes to the back, takes a backseat. And that's where cdk8s, CDK for Kubernetes, also comes in, right? Because it embraces this infrastructure is code concept and allows you to represent your Kubernetes applications and resources as pure source code. Now, I am a Go developer, like I said, I don't know if you remember. So I am going to show you Go examples today, but there's Java support, TypeScript. In fact, TypeScript is very, deeply, it's like this native language of cdk8s or CDK for that matter, and Python support as well. And the good part, at least from my perspective, and I know from a user, from a developer community perspective as well, is that cdk8s has nothing to do with a cloud provider, AWS or for that matter. So it's a first-class open source project. In fact, it's a CNCF project, Cloud Native Computing Foundation project. So you can use it pretty much anywhere from your local cluster or whatnot, right? There's no restriction as such. So I love that fact. That's one of the reasons I'm talking about it. So like I said, there will be some context switches, and this is the first one, right? So before I sort of talk a bit more, I want to go ahead and show you what this thing even looks like. So I have a cheat sheet. I keep forgetting stuff, so I've noted it down. Some of the things, not everything. This size is good enough. Font size is very healthy. So I have an empty directory which I'm going to switch into now. I'm using VS Code, code demo. This is all empty. So let me take a sip before that. I get very thirsty very quickly. All right, so in addition to being just a tool or a library or a framework, cdk8s also gives us a CLI, command line interface, right? So I'll say cdk8s, and if you look at it, it's very simple and compact. Just 3 commands: import, init, and synth. And you'll see this in action. I'm not going to explain like these individual commands. So first thing I'm going to do is say, hey, cdk8s, init, Go app. So Go app is not just a random string I'm putting in, it's very specific. Like I said, there are support for multiple programming languages. Go is one of them. So I'm specifying, I'm saying, hey, you know what, cdk8s, create a boilerplate project for me, something I can get started with and then write my code and, the specific to my problem or use case, right? So that's it. It created this very, very simple project for me, and this is the main.go file. Don't worry if you're not a Go developer, that's okay. Same thing applies to Java or other stuff. So this is my main file where I would, let me word wrap this thingy, where I would write my business logic or whatever that is, and I'm going to write that pretty soon. Don't worry about the rest of the stuff. I'm going to explain that pretty soon. So this is where this cheat sheet will come in handy. I don't want to waste your time or my time writing all this right now. This is not a code whisperer demo, right? Session. You already or probably the other folks that side already heard about Code Whisperer, so I'm not going to try all that. So just copy pasted some code. I'm going to tell you what it is and the other stuff. So I initiated a boilerplate code. I, in this case, copy pasted some code, but you would write something which is corresponding to your business logic. Now I'm going to say, hey, cdk8s, not cdjs, cdk8s, synthesize, synth, so this synth CLI command, synthesize or convert this into what? YAML, right? So like I said, we cannot run away from YAML, we can try and push it behind the scenes. So where is this YAML created? You know what, I'm going to show you that later anyway, so let me not break the flow. So once I've created this YAML, back to our favorite tool, kubectl, or anything for that matter, and apply, and where is my file? It's in this dist folder. I'm going to show you that very soon. I'm using a local, Kubernetes in Docker, a kind cluster. This is not EKS, at least not right now. So my service and the deployment has been created. If I do, I'm bad at type get all. Nothing fancy. I have a pod, I have a service, I have a deployment, right? As you would expect. And if I want to access this, you know what? I'm going to copy paste. No, it's okay. kubectl. This is just an Nginx container. kubectl port forward. What is this? This is the name of the service. And this is because I'm using a local cluster, right? I'm having to do this port forwarding and everything. So I'm going to access this on my local port 8080. Okay, this is Nginx. I'll show you, and let me go to my browser here. And okay, successful. Hello, welcome to it. So hello world of cdk8s was successful. Great. And this is indeed running, because if I stop this port forwarding and try this again, this won't run. So very simple, nothing fancy here. But the important thing is, now let me go to the YAML file. I'll first show you the YAML file, what it generated. This is nothing fancy, regular stuff which you would have written by hand or maybe copy pasted from anywhere else. That's fine. So we have a service, we have a deployment, and service is of type load balancer, and we have a deployment. And what was the code which was responsible for this? So I'll go top to bottom in a logical fashion. So I'm using the cdk8s library. Obviously, I've imported the framework. The library is there. And this is the important thing actually. And this is something which you need to understand. So it's actually, has anyone used the Kubernetes Go client here, or any client for that matter? No, that's okay. So, okay, all right, awesome. So Kubernetes gives you client libraries in multiple languages. So cdk8s is not actually using or pulling that in. It's sort of doing its own magic on top of that, and it's giving you a custom sort of set of APIs or libraries which you can access from within cdk8s. So I thought I should call it out, because you'll be able to see this in the imports folder here, right? So everything here which you see is the access to the Kubernetes world, and you'll see how that happens here. So if I go to new my chart, this is a function, and I'll tell you what a chart is, don't worry about it. I do the usual stuff. I create a label selector, I create an Nginx container, I create a deployment object, and everything by calling a method, as you would expect, right? Usual stuff. And I create a service of type load balancer, and I wire them as dependencies, and boom, I return this chart. That's it. And then I synthesized it and just converted it into a YAML file. Okay? So as simple as that. I'm going to context switch, go back to my presentation again. So this is essentially a recap of what you just saw. You did an init, you had the cdk8s CLI, of course I had it installed. You did an init, created a boilerplate project, added your business logic. In this case, I just added a simple Nginx sort of deployment as well as a service to expose it. And then you said synth, create a YAML manifest, and from there on you can use whatever you want to. I use kubectl, but whatever workflow you have, you can continue using it. Moving on. Remember in the code, just try and recall. So this is here. So you saw things like chart and everything. So I quickly want to give you some context there. So there are like a couple of key things to understand about cdk8s from a library perspective, right? The key concept is that it works on the format of a tree. So it's a hierarchical sort of tree-like collection of components. And on the top of that hierarchy, something called an app. Right, that's what it's called. It's just nomenclature. Nothing too don't need to think too much into the nomenclature. So if we create a new app, right here, if you see in the main function, so that's the first thing which we do. And within an app, you can have one or more charts. So as you can see here, I have mapped to the corresponding code on point 2. We create a chart using the function new chart, as you might expect. And the third thing which is important is within each of these charts is where you create your basic foundation, basic building blocks of your Kubernetes applications. I just created a simple deployment and a service, but you could create other things as well. And all these components have a general term, one common name. It's called a construct. And if you have worked with CDK, you might have already heard of it, but just FYI, right? So this is a gist of sort of how cdk8s work at a logical perspective and how it sort of this mental model actually. All right, so cdk8s it's good to start with, but everything has a flaw. Not everything is perfect. So let's explore that side of things, right? And one of the things is cdk8s is actually a pretty low-level library, and that's there for a reason, right? But as a result, it can get a little verbose. So, for example, this is directly from the cdk8s documentation on your left, I believe. Yeah, your left. This is with cdk8s vanilla library, the native library, and on your right is the one with a library called cdk8s plus, not plus plus, just cdk8s plus. So, I want to show you this, but at the same time, I don't want you to get hung up on this concept of lines of code or verbosity too much, because it can depend on a lot of things, right? A lot of context, your use case, how you format the code, the linter, and even the programming language. So this is Node.js. I am a Go programmer, right? I write Go stuff. You might write Java. That's okay. And if you look at this Go example, you might argue, Abhishek, I mean, you know what? It's not too much of a deal. So that is why the important thing in terms of cdk8s plus, what I want you to understand is the level of abstraction. So cdk8s plus gives you a higher level of abstraction, and that in turn makes sure that there are fewer lines of code to work with. It's less verbose. You have a more intuitive API, more natural, more free-flowing. So that creates less of a mental overhead. And as we all know, as developers, right, folks who are coding day in, day out for a living, that is productivity, right? Less mental overload, better API. We like API ergonomics. I love it actually, right? So that's the key part of cdk8s plus, not just the lines of code. Just want to throw that out there. So that's there. Now imagine there's this concept of construct as well, like I was telling, everything is construct, but there's this notion of custom constructs. Now imagine if you are creating complex applications using cdk8s, okay? And everyone, and you have a large team, everyone in your team or org is sort of, needs this application, but with a slightly different configuration or, slight variance. And instead of every developer in your team or across your org doing their own thing and building the same stuff, reinventing the wheel, you can rather write or encapsulate these things as something called custom constructs and share them across your teams and orgs, right, to create this scalable way of sharing code and your business logic, okay? And the good thing is that there's this thing called Constructs Hub, which is this place where AWS and community providers and other open source constructs are already published. So it's like they're ready to plug and play and use for you, right? So that's another important concept for you to understand and absorb, which is from a productivity point of view, which is custom constructs. Demo again. Now I'm going to check with you. Is it okay if I switch? Because that's going to make a lot of sense. Like I introduce a concept, talk about it in a demo. So hopefully that's okay. If not, feel free, like I said, to interrupt me. So I'm going to do some context switches here. So how do you actually do this in practice? How does it look in practice is what I think is important. So I'm going to talk about that. Before that, I'll do some cleanup. Not here, sorry. Just so that it doesn't confuse you, I'm going to delete, this bit. Close this and yes, I'm going to go to this. So I'm going to use example of a WordPress application, okay? Just as an example to explain this, cdk8s plus as well as custom construct, okay? So I don't know if you have heard of you may have used WordPress, but from an application architecture point of view, very, very quickly, so it has this MySQL component, the database part, and the other backend part, the PHP application, which I have no clue about. I don't know PHP, never seen it in life, but then of course it's very popular. So now this is where I have actually created a WordPress, or rather the code, cdk8s code for the infrastructure for a WordPress deployment on Kubernetes, okay? So I'll walk you through this. As you can see, I'm using cdk8s plus library in addition to the vanilla one. And this is the MySQL chart, okay? And this is going to create MySQL deployment on Kubernetes. Just notice the way the API is being used. That's important, okay? So, and this is not how you should create passwords. This is just for demo, FYI. So I declare a new secret. Okay, I create the secret object. To this, I add data, my password itself. It's of string data. I create a new deployment. You saw this. To this deployment, I add a container. It happens to be of this name, and this is the name of the Docker image, which I'm going to use in this container. I create an environment value from a secret value, and then kind of attach this within the MySQL container itself. I add it as a variable. Then I create a lot of other things, right? Persistent volume claims, if you are familiar with Kubernetes, all for storage. So I create a PVC, and then I create a volume from this. I declare a volume on top of this persistent volume claim, and then what I do is I mount this within my container and so on and so forth, and I create a service. This is a cluster IP service. Same thing with this WordPress chart over here. If you see similar things, right? So I'm not going to repeat that. So the point I'm trying to make is, or rather go back to, is the intuitiveness or the flow or the natural sort of feel to the API. That's very important from a cdk8s plus and a productivity perspective, right? So that's that. This was just a walkthrough. Now what I'm going to do is now go to my custom construct example, and I'm going to stick to this concept of WordPress, right? As an example, I'm going to stick to that. And as you can see, I have a to do here because I'm going to again copy paste some code. So bear with me for that, and I'll explain that in a second. Once I do that, just give me a second. Okay, and voila. All right. So imagine that within you're a developer tasked with standing up a WordPress application along with other things, right? Not just WordPress. And this is all you had to do. What are you doing? This is not, like using an external library. So this function you're calling here in this case, and I'm going to talk what's happening behind the scenes, is, hey, this is a new WordPress construct, and these are these configurations which I need. In this case, this is just a demo. So I'm like, passing this password, and I say, hey, this is the image for the MySQL, deployment. In this case, it's MariaDB, and this is the storage I need, etc., etc., etc. And behind the scenes, what is this function? If I were to go into it and just word wrap it, this is actually almost the same thing which you just saw a few seconds back. All I've done is, instead of like this being a MySQL chart and a different deployment, I have sort of made it compact and put it within the same function, and I have externalized some of the parameters or the configuration in the form of a struct or a class, right? And that was then used in that the main.go file, right? So you see the point here. So what I'm going to do now is actually make use of this and deploy a WordPress cluster real quick. First, I'm going to synthesize this code, convert this. So don't worry about this. This is just complaining about a Node.js version. So that's not a bug or something. So this created a dist file over here, which I'm going to obviously just like always created and then talk about it a little bit. Okay, so a lot of things were created. So let me first show you that file real quick. So this is the file which was created. Again, nothing fancy, nothing different, but imagine you writing this on your own. It's a pain. So there's a secret for my MySQL. This is my MySQL deployment in this case. I'm using this MariaDB image like I had put in the code. This is the PVC. Everything which you saw in the code is there. 3 GB. Remember, 3 GI. That was the storage which I had specified. I have a service, so on and so forth, right? Nothing fancy. And then if I were to scroll down, you will see the same thing for the WordPress component as well. Only it has a load balancer type of service and other stuff, right? So let's see if our WordPress deployment is up. How is it doing? So looks like, our pods are up and running, etc., etc. So things are looking fine. You know what? This time I'm going to copy paste. I'm typing too much. Yeah, I'm going to actually make use of this cheat sheet. So I'm going to port forward and access WordPress here. Same port 8080 this time. And yeah, this is the WordPress admin console. Doesn't matter. I mean, this is not the important part. I mean, you can set up WordPress, blah, blah, blah. But this is just something which I want to show you. So you have a local WordPress cluster, and there's this power for you to be able to represent as a Kubernetes deployment, as an entire Kubernetes application, and then having the ability to also share that with other developers or other teams across your organization. So that's the power of cdk8s plus and the custom constructs combination, right? Context switch again, going to go back. Hope that's cool. Let's move on. So I'm going to talk about a slightly more advanced, I have about 14 minutes, okay? Slightly more advanced concept, and that's about integrating CRDs, custom resource definitions, with cdk8s. So really the use case or the problem statement here is, what if, so you are totally, I mean, suppose you totally buy the cdk8s concept, right? And you have existing, any real world Kubernetes application, you are going to have production grade stuff. You're going to have CRDs there, either say through some open source provider, or maybe you have created your own controllers, right? You might have heard in the last session, right? Argo CD was used as an example. So how do you use cdk8s in that context? But before that, I'll just take maybe 30 seconds to revise, right? If you want to represent custom Kubernetes concepts in addition to the native resources like pods and deployments and stateful sets, that is where you actually use these things called custom resources. And in order to use a custom resource where you declare your custom concept, you need to declare a custom resource definition. So the relationship is like this, that of a class and instance. So CRD is actually a class, and you can make multiple instances or custom resources from that CRD, right? So that's a good analogy to remember, at least in my opinion. And there's this important third component, an operator or a controller. You must have heard of that as well. Because Kubernetes, it will not understand your custom resource because it is trained or programmed to understand deployments and stateful sets, okay? So you have to create your own custom code, an operator to respond in an event of you creating your custom resource, right? So that's like a gist. I think I took more than 30 seconds. I apologize. And a good example is Argo CD, of course. And another one is ACK, AWS controller for Kubernetes. Again, a mouthful. So this is, again, it embraces this concept of custom resources. So this is just an example of an Amazon RDS database, but the same applies to, and there is support for Lambda, there is support for S3, there is support for DynamoDB. So essentially you can represent all these AWS services using YAML files, believe it or not, right? And then when you create those YAML files, so essentially ACK is very modularized. It has a controller and an operator. It's not like a mega one monolith. For each AWS service, it has a different operator. So RDS is different, DynamoDB is different. So when assuming you have that operator installed, when you create this YAML file, kubectl apply or something else, it's going to go spin into action and create and manage that AWS resource for you. So you're going from one YAML file, one kubectl, boom, to an AWS service, and then sort of managing that as well. So that's the entire idea here. And how do you use a CRD? It's simple, four simple steps. One of them is common. So first thing is you use this command called import. Like I told you, only 3 commands: import, init, and synth. So import is one of them. So what you do is cdk8s, just point it to an existing CRD. It might be available locally or on network or out on GitHub or whatnot. And then once you do that, and I'll show you this in a demo very soon. I'll do some context switch again. I apologize. It's going to create these packages. Now this is a DynamoDB example and in Go, but same thing in Java or Python or anything, right? So it's going to create these APIs or packages which you can then use or refer to or call or invoke within your application, the Kubernetes or end-to-end application which you are going to write. And then finally you do your good old cdk8s synth. to make that happen. Again, I'm going to go into a demo, but before I do that, I have 10 minutes. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. So before I do that, just to give you a quick overview, right? So what I'm going to show you here is a URL shortener application. Everything is deployed on EKS. DynamoDB is the backend database. I have the DynamoDB ACK operator already obviously deployed and everything. And cdk8s is the one which sort of orchestrates, or rather defines in code both this application and the infrastructure. In this case, the infrastructure happens to be the DynamoDB database, okay? So with that, I'm going to switch again. And what I'm going to do this time is, I'm going to switch to EKS. Now it's time for EKS. Let's do that. Switch to EKS. I have done that. I'll close this thing. Yeah, this was my CRD demo. Okay, I'm battling against time now. All right, let's see. All right, so first thing what I'm going to do is actually not show you this. Why did I go here? So first thing I'm going to do is import, like I told you, right? I'll show you how to import these things. So I'll do this in parallel actually, because this can take a bit of time, but it's okay, we'll manage. So what I'm doing here is cdk8s import blah blah blah. So what is this thing? This is actually a custom resource definition, and this is a ACK or GitHub repo, by the way. So as you can see, this is a custom resource definition, and this defines a DynamoDB table, right? That's it. I'm not going to go into details of what it is and whatnot. This is an ACK specific thing, but in the context of cdk8s, we are just pointing to it, okay? And what was the other one? If I go there, this is actually not super important, very ACK specific, but we still need this concept of field exports. Don't worry about it, not cdk8s specific, but I still had to import those APIs, generate those APIs, because this is common across ACK, so DynamoDB or any other service is going to use this. So I had to kind of import this anyway, right? So two CRDs which I imported. This takes time, so let's see. It's okay, you know what, I'm not going to waste too much time. It's okay, I'm going to stop this, that's fine, because I have stuff pre-imported as well, obviously. I'm going to quickly, excuse me, let me open a new window. And what I'm going to do is, first, now I'm going to create AWS resources. But before that, let me show you that there's nothing. So there's this table I'm going to create named URLs, but it is not there now. You would expect that, and that's a good thing. Okay, so I'm going to do a cdk8s synth, because that code which I had written, and I'm going to go through that code. Oh, what happened? Okay, oh, not this. Okay, so I actually created an external script for that, so I don't have to do all those things. So I'm going to apply this YAML file, and as you can see, this has created these custom resources in my EKS cluster now. Now, if I were to go back and see, okay, almost instantaneously, right, a DynamoDB table has been created for me, okay? Now what I'm going to do now is go back again and also deploy the application as well, okay? Just first clear this, and then I'm going to talk about it a little bit, because it's going to do a couple of things which I'm going to need later. So while I'm going to talk about it, it's probably going to go ahead and do those things, okay? So I will first show you this. The DynamoDB, the other one is application, is something which you have seen already. So take a look at this YAML which got generated. This was because you had imported that DynamoDB ACK CRD, you ran cdk8s import, and it automatically generated all that code which I'm going to walk through, and then it created this YAML. And this is a custom resource. Kubernetes does not know it by itself. So this is a DynamoDB table, attribute definitions, all the usual stuff with the DynamoDB. Config map and all you can ignore for now. That is not important, right? So that is that. And if I were to close this and show you the code as to what's going on, these are the packages which were actually generated with the cdk8s import, and look at how I am using it, okay? If I were to scroll down over here, so I'm using this package, and the APIs are, hey, new table, and then I create this table, and then I reference it in other parts of my code, including the deployment part. Now this is the application itself. This is my Kubernetes application. The DynamoDB part was up there, like I showed you earlier. Okay, so this has the usual stuff. This has a deployment and a container and an environment variable and a service and whatnot. So I have a load balancer service here as well, right? So this is the URL shortener application, and that one was the DynamoDB table, okay? So I think I have had enough time for things to get created in the backend, because I was waiting for something and then I used this time to explain to you and give you some context as well. I have 5 minutes, wow. Okay, so I'll rush. Everything is ready. Yeah, so if I were to quickly go and sort of access this application. So this application is, so the service is of type load balancer. So that created a classic load balancer in EKS, and that is the URL actually. And if I were to use this quickly from an application perspective, so and this is something me invoking the application. That's okay. You can read up later about this. So what it did was I passed in this URL, and this is a URL shortener application, remember? And it gave me a short code. If you see this short code down at the bottom, the JSON response. So if I were to, 1 second, if I were to, yeah, if I were to paste this and go to my browser and say, hey, 1990, and go and access that short code. And this short code and everything has been created in DynamoDB. I'll show you that as well. If I were to access it, so now, so this is the URL redirection part which has happened, 302, and then the browser actually led to this, right? So nothing fancy here, right? You all use it in your day-to-day life anyway, Bitly and excuse whatnot. So that's that. Yeah, and I think I want to show you the DynamoDB table as well, just in case, right? Because this is getting persisted there. So the same, short code there. So that's that in terms of this quick demo. I'm going to be cognizant of time and keep moving. Yeah. So what you just saw was in the context of DynamoDB, but there's a similar thing which I've written. I think I've got good feedback in the past. Same thing for a Redis deployment on AWS. This is a memory DB for Redis cluster, by the way, which I'm going to talk, which is sort of explained in this content piece over here. Finally, CDK and cdk8s. I know, similar. They're like literally like brothers. Okay. So just to give you context, right? CDK, AWS CDK. So you've used AWS CDK. Who here has used AWS Cloud Development Kit? Again, another. Oh, that's okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, not a lot of people. I'll give you a quick context again from a time perspective. So CDK actually came before cdk8s. cdk8s in fact takes a lot of inspiration in terms of concepts and in general from cdk8s. So essentially what you do is, instead of writing these cloud formation templates, again YAML, you can do JSON as well, but YAML mostly. So what you do is you take your favorite programming language, not favorite, whatever is supported, it's Go and Java and Python and TypeScript by CDK, and you write code, you run the CLI, the CDK CLI, you do the same thing, CDK synth, and it spits out a cloud formation template, and then you can use it with the tooling of your choice, right? So again, infrastructure is code, not with respect to Kubernetes applications, but with respect to your AWS services or resources. And this is important to understand, because what if you don't want to use ACK, the one which I just showed you, and you want to use CDK8s for your Kubernetes application to represent it as code, and you want to use ACK, how do you combine that, right? So again, like I said, they're brothers, and if you literally like brothers, and if you add them, peanut butter and jelly, literally, right? So I'm not going to go to the code here, I have a walkthrough, but this is the experience of just using CDK. There's no CDK8s here, right? And so the first thing is I declared this deployment, and I tell you, I literally tore my hair out when I first wrote this. I should have used something like Amazon Code Whisperer or something, but I did not that time. You write your service and your Kubernetes service, your deployment, and then you do something called EKS cluster.add manifest, and this is all CDK API, and EKS cluster is a CDK object or a construct. Think of it in that way, and it has this method called add manifest. This is as good as kubectl, right? It's like kubectl available to you programmatically, but there's something better, of course, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about it. And there is this, in the same object, in the EKS cluster object within CDK, there's this method called add cdk8s chart, and this method is literally the bridge between your CDK world and your cdk8s world. So what you can do now is write code to represent your Kubernetes applications with cdk8s, And when you write that construct, the whatever stuff some of the things which you saw, you externalize that as a function. And then when you're writing your infrastructure part within CDK application, and when you define your EKS cluster object, you just do a dot add. See, I should have actually put that code snippet here, I apologize. But anyway, use this method and boom, you literally have all your combinations, all your moving parts in one single sort of pane of glass, so to speak, right? So that's the beauty here. Again, not going too deep. Walk through, I'm not going to do that. I have literally 30 seconds, but I'm going to like overshoot by a few seconds. Last slide, or second last, I guess. I haven't used so many words, I think, throughout my presentation, but a wordy slide to end it with. I guess this is what I want you to, my request is for you as a takeaway, right? So this is, you can't really, get rid of YAML. So think about, if it really irritates you, think about certain tools and libraries, not just cdk8s, could be something else. So it's about less YAML, writing more code, less YAML, and embrace this infrastructure is code concept, okay? And like I said, I spoke to some of these things, right? Optimization and higher productivity with cdk8s plus, and reusing with or extending or reusing with the combination of custom constructs and CRDs, okay? And combined with CDK. And there's also, I'm not going to talk about it, but there's Helm, there's GitOps functionality which you can also bring in or combine with CDK and cdk8s. Of course, I had to point out to the official resource as well. There's good documentation, and the GitHub repo has very good examples as well for almost all the programming language, not just Go, so it has good support. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for being such a patient listener. Last session of the day. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
I don't think we're going to have time for questions, so that's okay. Kahoot quiz, enjoy it. Thank you. I'm going to be available if you need me.
One question, please.
Yeah.
Does it look like more like who wants to completely avoid writing YAML?
Sorry.
It looks like more easy to write YAML instead of writing the code instead, right? So what is the advantage we are getting, right?
So I mean, may I put a question to you? So why do you think it's easier to write YAML?
Anyway, you have to write it via following the documentation and all, right? So you can just copy that YAML. It will be
so if you I guess the question is about these are demos, right? If you think about long-term sustainability, maintenance, operations, things of that nature, that is when you will see the value of code. See, YAML is also pretty old. I don't want to compare like when did programming language get invented, when is YAML, because I'm not sure. Programming languages for decades, right? So really the point is to use something which you know and you understand very well or quite well for at least a few decades here, right? You can, and I didn't even talk about some of the best practices like testing. How do you test your YAML stuff? One of the points, right? So and if we keep on discussing, and we can do that after this, right? So there are a lot of things which the benefits you will gain is everything which you pick up from the programming language world, your CI/CD pipelines, your GitOps, your everything else, your testing, everything else, all the best practices are going to be transferred to your infrastructure now.
Whether testing is a good point, definitely.
Right. So that is just one point, by the way, right? There are other things to be had or other benefits to be reaped. So I'm going to keep it very short. We can continue this discussion. Any other question? I can take one more, maximum.
Sorry. One thing, take it outside. We are already 20 minutes
all right.
behind.
We are 20 minutes behind. The guy has said it, so I'll take it outside.
Can you go to the Redis slide once? I want to take a
Sorry, which one?
Redis on Kubernetes.
Redis on Kubernetes. Just one sec, buddy. Karan, I know. Is this the one? All right. Sure thing. Cool. All right. Thanks, folks.